All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Steve Livesey. I'm currently the CTO of ID90 Travel, but I am also the co-creator of the tooling we're about to see here today. This is the OTM OpenTravel Model Development Environment, and we'll be taking a look at our model editor, the OTM DEx. We'll look at another tool we call the Example Helper. We'll walk through a little bit of our repository capabilities, and then we're going to take a look at some of the compiled output from the models. And along the way, we're going to talk about what is an OTM model and kind of how does it work and why did we need it versus other types of modeling languages that are out there right now, like UML. Okay, so to get started, the OTM DEx is kind of the second generation of a modeling application. We had an original project that was an older Eclipse RCP based application that has since been retired and is no longer supported. But the OTM DEx has all of the capabilities that were there, plus several more that weren't present in the original one. And so rather than sit here and talk about all of the different capabilities, I'm just going to dive right in and open up a model that I've created for this presentation. And I should say, while it's loading, that this is actually not I created the demo project for this presentation, but the actual model is from OpenTravel, the OpenTravel Alliance, some of their hospitality shopping APIs. So you can see when we open the model here, we have a whole string of different types. These are all the different types that are created in the model. They're all from different libraries, different versions of different libraries around the model. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this particular model, except to say that we have a number in any OTM model. We have another number of different types of different data types you can create. So we have business objects. We have the business objects contain, custom facets, query facets. We'll talk a little bit about those things. We have choice objects. We have core objects. Core objects would be things that are not uniquely identified, like addresses or phone numbers. We have values with attributes, which are pretty much what they sound, a simple value that has other attributes associated with it. And then we have simple types like strings and integers and things like that. Okay, so going back to our business objects, though, business objects really form the heart and soul of an OTM model because they are the types that are uniquely identifiable nouns. So think of it like that. So think of a noun as being an object or a type that represents something in the real world. It has a unique identity and it has a number of different attributes in it. When we get into talking about resources, those those directly correlate to REST APIs. So the resources represent the verbs. So when you have a noun, resources essentially define all of the actions or verbs that can be performed on that noun. Okay, so going back to the business objects here, one of the important things to understand about a business object or even a core object and a choice object in any OTM model is we have what's called faceted views of all of the different objects. So the best way to explain this is to show it. So if I look at the form of payment object here, you can see that every business object has what we call an ID facet, an identity facet, which defines what are the fields required to uniquely identify this object in any system where it's defined. Okay, moving on from there, we have what's called a summary facet. And these are all the fields and all the values that are common to, in this case, every type of form of payment. Okay, and then as we go further down in the hierarchy, we see that we have form of payment types for, in this case, miscellaneous change order. We have payment cards, we have direct bill. And if we start to look inside some of these things, we have different fields that are defined for each of those different types of forms of payment. Okay, so and if we look here, we've got a kind of a hierarchy built up where everything in the summary facet, where the summary facet inherits everything from the ID facet, and things in these custom facets here, what we call custom facets, inherit all of the fields from the summary facet. So we have kind of a an inheritance hierarchy going on here, but it's really more around a level of detail that would be represented for this business object. So why do we do this? So if we go all the way back to the original, what we now call the OpenTravel 1.0 models and messages, we found that there were a lot of items in those models that were duplicate types, but had completely different definitions in terms of the fields and the elements and the attributes that were in those objects. And the reason for this was, if we take something like a passenger or a traveler, okay, a traveler will have a very different level of detail of things you need to know about them at the beginning of a process. So for instance, a shopping process, I need to know very little about my traveler, versus when we get to the end of the payment workflow at the end of the process where we're actually doing a booking, I need to know a lot more information about the traveler at that time. And these were all defined as different types. And so we had different copies of traveler scattered around all of the different schemas and messaging definitions. And it was really confusing to people which definition of traveler was needed at any given time. Okay, so rather than having those all scattered around different parts of the process, we've created a consolidated view where I can say, this is the business object of in this case, a form of payment, but which form of payment you need is going to be dependent on your business flow, what you're doing at the time. Okay, so that's about as deep as I want to get into the business objects. But as you drill down into here, you'll see that things like enumerations and values with attributes, simple types, these are all things that can comprise these higher level definitions that we call business objects. Okay, so and to give a little tour of the application now, what we're seeing here, we first of all see our list of all of the different types here, and we have filters that we can go through. And when we have this checked out and it's editable, we can focus on only the things that we can edit. We can filter by which library is it coming from. All really good things to help control the level of detail that a user has to know about and work with as they're editing their model. Okay, when I look into the properties, I mean, right now all of this is read only, but as I can lock and check out libraries for editing, this is where I would actually edit, and add and remove and change cardinalities, things like that. Okay, if I go to the resources view, this is going to be a part of the model where, like I said, we define the resources or the verbs related to a particular business object. So if we pick this one here, which this is actually related to hospitality shopping, you can see that our resource is related to a business object, in this case, hospitality offers V2, version 2. And so this defines some, some basic information, base path, what are the different message formats that we're going to accept. And then we have a number of different views of payload in here. And I'm not going to get into detail about how we go define a resource or the mechanics of defining it. But suffice it to say, we get down to here and we see I have two different operations, one for finding multi-property offers and one for finding single property offers. Okay, so this is where we define the request and the responses for each operation. And if we look here, I'm going to point out one additional little interesting aspect of business objects, where if we look at this payload type, we see that the payload type is query find hospitality offers, and our reference facet is a query facet. So if I go back to I'm going to go back for just a second to my business object view, and I'm going to go to this hospitality offers business object. And if we see here, not only do I have the ID, summary, detail facets like we talked about before that define the actual data model of this business object, you can see we have a couple of what we call query facets. And these are things that actually allow us to define the searches for the business object. Now, this isn't in that inheritance hierarchy I was talking about before, but it is something that's fairly unique to a business object, that part of the definition of that object is how we're going to allow people to search for it. So that's defined as part of the business model, and then we can expose that in operations as we look into the resource view, where we define the different operations we can perform on that business object. Okay, so that's kind of the modeling aspect of it. And when we want to go edit the models, I want to walk through a few more areas here, a few more of these tabs where we can kind of see a little bit more about the how the model works and how this tool works and what we can do with it. So if I go back to my form of payment object, and one of the questions I might want to know about this is, where is it used? Where is that being used around the model? And so now I can see that I've got fields where I can say these are the places where the users of it, these are the members that use it, these are the ones that contribute to it from different places. So lots of rich information here. When you have a model open in your desktop, this view is going to tell you, hey, if I change this business object, what are the other places in the model that I'm going to affect? Which is really, really useful when it comes to like versioning strategies and all sorts of those things. Okay, we have a list of libraries that are open. These are the libraries in the project that I have open right now. And very interesting part of this is if I go look at the repository view, I'm going to see a view, and it's taking a minute to load up here, but I'm going to see a lot of different, what we call namespaces here. And so I'm going to have, lists where I can go look in our remote repositories. What is a repository? Okay, an OTM repository is a place where model designers can store and share and lifecycle manage all of their different models and libraries that they create for the models. So what exactly does that look like? So you'll notice we're kind of browsing an online repository here. This is actually the OpenTravel repository. And if I go to the actual website for opentravelmodel.net, we'll see that I've got a web portal that essentially allows us to go browse and view the same information. So I'm going to log in here where I get a little bit better access. And you can see that a lot of the base namespaces that I was browsing here in my application are all available here too. So I could actually go and browse into here and look at product and hospitality. I can go back and go to resources where I would see hospitality resources, and there's my hospitality offers resource that we were seeing before. Okay, and you can see I also have similar views here: uses, where used. I have errors and warnings, other things like releases and assemblies. I've got a history of who's made changes to this. Okay, so a lot of really rich information. And unlike the uses and where used that we had in the application in the DEx that showed us, this is where it's used in our model. This view actually goes and looks at the entire repository. So whether I've got it open in my project or not, I can see the entire global view of where is this particular type in relation to, where is it used, where is it referenced, in both directly and indirectly throughout the entire universe of libraries that exist in this repo. Okay, so going back to the DEx, one final view that I want to show here is what we call the graphical view. Now I'm going to clear this off real quick, and I'm going to bring up our hospitality offers view. And if you look here, we've got a really interesting view where now I can see this visually. I see my ID, my summary, my two query facets that I have, but I also have all of the others here. So if I want to go view what's in the offer, I can come over here and actually browse the offer, and I can keep drilling down into it. Things like terms and conditions and what's my price, okay, and all of that. And I can keep digging down into every level of detail here. But the good news is I can also start collapsing it if I just want to show or examine a particular aspect of this. So this is a handy thing because sometimes it's the properties view and the resources view. These are good for people that are designing models and people that are editing the details. But for some people, when I'm just trying to explain it to somebody, being able to show the just a graphical view of this, a little more of a UML-like format that people are used to, this comes in really handy for those purposes here. So I wanted to show that, and this has been a very interesting and successful part of the project, that it helps people really crystallize their understanding of what's in a model. Okay, so now I want to jump out of the DEx, and I want to show you a new application, or actually it's an older application, but it's been one that's been very handy for a long time. The OTM DE example helper. So, like I said, some people respond to just seeing the properties view and the details in the editor. Some people really need to look at the graphical view in order to get an idea of what the model represents. And still other people actually get more understanding by looking at an example message. And so that's what we've got here in the example helper. So if I use my my previous example of a form of payment, you can see I actually get a real message here. Okay, I can get it in XML, I can switch over to JSON. And if you start looking in some of these things, you'll see that we actually do have, if I have, system, and this is obviously a sample message, organization, I get values, indicators, yes, no, guarantee type code, air travel card. So these are things that look like real pieces of data. And and where they're coming from is when you define an OTM model, you can also create example values for the fields and the attributes and the elements in that model. And so that way, when we generate these kinds of examples, it has real looking content. And obviously, we have some default values that really haven't been entered in the model yet. But when you go in and you generate these kinds of things, it has real data, and that's really, really handy for people who want to understand the model and the content and the meaning of it. Unlike if you go into other tools like XML Spy that are going to have, if it's a field of length, string length 50, you're going to get 50 A's or something like that, which is pretty meaningless to somebody that's trying to understand the content. So if I look at the model here, you'll see that I also have the ability to go pick these different types of payment types here. So it starts out, it defaults to the summary. I could go all the way and just say, I just want to see the identifier, what's the ID information. But I could also go down and say, what does it look like if I'm doing this with a payment card? Okay, now I get a lot more fields here and a lot more information. And this is all of the detail and all the different types of fields that are going to be there in a payment card. And then if I'm at the payment card summary, there may be different options. I could go grab it here. In this case, I really do only have the summary, but if I want to go look at a voucher, what does a voucher look like? Okay, so very, very flexible, very interesting view of the data where I can just play around with the different types of data that are in here and play around with the different levels of detail. One use has been, of course, to just let people kind of understand what the message looks like. We've also had development teams that actually can take and save this output as an example file, and they can actually use it as the input to things like automated tests, things like that. So mock tests and automated tests, very, very handy for creating that type of static data for this. Okay, so the last thing I want to show, I want to go in here and I want to actually show, why are we doing all this? What's the real thing that we're trying to get out of it? I'm going to jump back to the DEx for a second, and I want to show that, as I've got this project in here, I've also got this example to compile. Well, what does that mean? Well, I've done this ahead of time, so we wouldn't have to wait too long for it. But if I compile, I'm going to get some real artifacts out of this. And this is really the point of an OTM model where when I go look at what's generated from this particular model, I have Swaggers, which is the OpenAPI 2.0 spec. Okay, I also have the OpenAPI 3.0. Okay, and if I look in here, I'm going to get, just what I would expect in an API from, that would be compatible with OpenAPI tooling, documentation, things like that. This is the actual spec. And so you can see I've got, in my model, I've got, find single property offers. I've got all of those responses. I've got find multi-property offers. Those were the two operations we had in there. And then I've also got sections at the end that contain all the components and the schemas for all the definitions that go into the payloads for that model. So there's a lot of rich information in here. So all of the different types I was showing in DEx, all of the ones that have a dependency on this on these APIs that I created here, they're going to be present in this components section. And likewise, I've got the Swagger. If some organizations are still using Swagger, I've even got XML schemas, so XSDs, if I need to use the XML definitions. I've got, if somebody ever needed it, we do have SOAP services, so we've got WSDLs for some of the APIs that were defined by OpenTravel. We've got JSON schema, and so basically any real API representation you can have, we've got the ability to generate it from the OTM model. The other thing I will say is this is something that's extensible. So this capability, and I'll go show you a quick overview of where some of the code is at. But one of the things we have as a core part of this application is what we call the OTM compiler. So the OTM compiler is what is the code that takes this model from the OTM libraries that comprise it and actually generate artifacts like this. And so some organizations have actually taken this and generated Java code or binding code, things like that. So that we generate documentation, we generate examples, we generate all of those sorts of things. So really anything you can conceive of that you can output from the content of this OTM model, we've got the ability to extend that compiler as needed and to generate new things with it. Okay, so the last thing I want to show here is really where does all this tooling come from? Okay, so if I go to GitHub, you will find an organization called the OpenTravel Alliance. So all of this code is owned and maintained by OpenTravel under an Apache 2.0 license, which means it's fully open source. Anybody can come and grab the code or the compiled artifacts and use them to either edit OpenTravel models, or you could actually go create your own repository and maintain repositories with your own models in there. And there are a number of organizations that have done that. So what I want to show here is just kind of where does that come from. So if we look at OTM DE, that's the original OTM DEx development environment. This is the one that's really, we haven't fully deactivated it yet, but this is deprecated. So I would say stay away from this one. The two projects that you'll probably be the most interested in, if we come to OTM DE utilities, this is where we have all of the things bundled, like the OTM DEx and the OTM example, the OT2 example helper that I showed you here today. And there's a number of other applications that are out there that we haven't had time to go into. If I go to the tags and then to the releases, you will see that this zip file here, you can actually download the executable, the launcher that has all of these different applications in it that you can launch it on your desktop and use it yourself. Okay. And if I go back to OpenTravel, the other thing that I'll show here is the OTM DE compiler. Now this gets into all the Java code and everything. It's very techy. I'm not going to dive into that detail, but I will show right here, when we do builds of this, you can see we've got a number of, we got a WAR file, we've got zip files and things like that. These are actually artifacts that are used by some Ansible scripts that can do the automated tasks required to set up a new repository. So if you have an interest in, actually creating your own repository and running it, we've got the playbooks here that can actually, use these artifacts to go set that up for you. And just a very, very light view here. You can see that this is this OTA2 repository playbooks project. This is where those playbooks are located. If anybody has interest in doing that, please feel free to reach out and contact me. If you've got interest in becoming a contributor or just taking a closer look and getting more details on what's in these projects, please, by all means, feel free to contact me. I'll make myself available, and I really appreciate the opportunity to present and record this demo today. And I look forward to answering any questions that anybody might have. So thank you very much, and you all have a great day.